Hi guys! So I know I haven't been doing a whole lot of nail related videos lately, but meanwhile I have been doing some other creative projects such as card making. So today I thought I would share a card with you. And the card that I'll be showing you today will be based around a lovely sentiment from these darkroom door rubber stamps. And the paper that I'm using today is this watercolor paper from Canson, which is 300 grams per square meter. Now I'll be cutting it down with my Rexel cutter to a little bit larger than an A6 in size. Now this is useful so that I have some spare room for the taping, because I'm going to be taping it down before I water paint. And what I'll be taping it down to is this thin plywood board. And I'll just be using some regular masking tape to tape it down with. Now, it is really useful to always tape down your watercolor paper before you paint on it, so that it doesn't warp as much. After I've taped it down, I'll be starting my painting. And today I'll be using these two distress inks. Now the pink one is spun sugar, and the purple one is called Shaded Lilac. I thought these two pastel colors were really pretty for this background. And you don't really need to invest in any expensive equipment when doing simple backgrounds like this. So I'm just using some piece of plastic and just rubbing the distress colors right on there. And I have a white piece of paper underneath so that I can see the colors more easily. Then, once I've got some of the colors onto the plastic, I'll be using this little spray bottle. I'll be spraying it directly onto the distress inks to dilute them a little bit, and I'll be spraying some right on my paper to get it nice and moist, so that the colors will flow more easily. And once again, you don't really need any expensive equipment, so I'm just using this cheap number 6 brush that I got with this watercolor set that I bought. And you can definitely use bigger brushes, or well, smaller brushes too, I guess, for like loose backgrounds like this. It doesn't really matter, because the water is going to do most of the work for you. You're just going to be dripping the colors onto the paper and try to let the water move them for you as much as possible. Once I'm satisfied with the result, I'll be taking out my Ranger heated tool and drying it so the paper is fully dry. Now it is important that the paper is fully dry before you move on to the next step. Then I'll be taking out my spray bottle again, but this time I'm spraying the water onto my hands, and then I'm flicking it onto the paper like this. Now what's cool with distress inks is that they reactivate when they come in contact with water. So when you leave the water on there for a few seconds and maybe move it around a little bit, you can dry it off with the paper towel afterwards, and you'll get this really cool bleached effect where the water's been. Then I'll be drying it with my heated tool again, and once again make sure that it's fully dry before the next step. Now I'm going to die cut the paper to the size that I want it to be. So I'm taking out my Big Shot, and the die that I'm using is a Simon Says Stamp stitched rectangle die, and it's the biggest one of the set. Now What I really love about these dies is that they're just not some plain old rectangle dies, but they have the stitched pattern that adds just a little bit of detail. And I really think it adds something extra, especially to simple cards. Now I'll be moving on to my embossing. And first I'll be using this powder bag tool. Now what this does is that it releases small amounts of powder onto the paper, which makes sure that the embossing powder you'll be using will not stick to anything other than the ink, which is especially useful when you're using fine embossing powders, which will stick to just about anything. Now I'll be inking up my sentiment, and the ink that I'm using is Versamark Black Onyx, which is about my favorite black ink out of all the inks that I've tried. Now, as you can probably see, I'm pressing down quite hard to get the ink to reach into all those little wrinkles in the watercolor paper. Then I'll be inking up my second stamp, which is this wooden rubber stamp from Stampers Anonymous, and it's called Dried Flowers, I believe. I'll be stamping this to the side of the sentiment. And once again, I'm pressing down quite hard to get the ink in there and get a crisp, clean image. Then I'll be doing the embossing. And the embossing powder I'm using is Hero Art's Clear Ultra Fine Embossing Powder. And I'll just be pouring the embossing powder directly from the jar with the paper underneath. And you really just need to cover the image with a thin layer of embossing powder and just shaking it in there a little bit and then getting it off again and lightly tapping the back of the paper to get some of the residue off. Now for the most part this will be good enough, especially if you used a powder tool in advance like I did. But if there is some embossing powder left, you can use a little brush or your fingers to try and get it off. And then I'm taking out my heated tool again. But this time it's to melt the embossing powder. And in real life, this process is so cool to watch. Now unfortunately you can't see that too well in this video, but just seeing it turn from this grainy texture and becoming all glossy and black, it's just awesome, and I really think it adds a nice touch to a lot of cards. Then I thought my card needed just a little something extra, so I took out these small heart stamps from Simon Says Stamp and stamped them with the distress inks that I painted the card with earlier. Then I embossed them with the same embossing powder that I used for the other images. I also decided that this cute pink card needed some sparkle, so I added some pink and purple sequins. Finally, I covered most of the back of it with some 3M foam tape, and then I adhered it to this clear white card that I cut out. And this is how it turned out. I really hope you like it, and if you do like this video, please leave a comment or a like below. I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you next time.